Hello, welcome to the North Seattle College Art Gallery's virtual visiting artist lecture series. I'm Amanda Knowles, the coordinator of the North Seattle College Art Gallery, and I teach printmaking and drawing in the art department at North. I'm lucky to work with Claire Hargy, who is my assistant in the art gallery, Karen Stilldreyer, who's letting folks in today, and Anne, Mark, and Maddie, the gallery work study students. This is the fourth of our visiting artist lectures for the 2023-2024 school year. If you missed the rest, please go to the North Seattle College Art Gallery YouTube channel to catch the over 30 lectures that we have posted there. A lot of them are really, really great. We are thrilled to have artist and educator Ilana Zweschi with us today. I want to tell you early on that we have live transcript available for those of you who want it. It can be turned on by clicking Show to Subtitle button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. For those of you who don't want it or find it distracting, you can turn it off by clicking Hide Subtitle. Use it if you wish, hide it if you wish, but we want to be sure that we have it for those who need it. Are you finding it? Yes, okay. It is being found. We normally start these lectures with a land acknowledgement, but since the beginning of the school year, our institution has not been doing official rote land acknowledgements. Our college leaders are working to sit down with area tribal leaders to discuss a meaningful way to acknowledge and the importance of what it means to be settlers, as well as occupiers, descendants, and inheritors of a system which sought to eradicate the original caretakers of this land. We are nothing without these folks, and we want to build a society where we are thoughtful about how we show that we stand in solidarity with the sovereignty, cultural heritage, and lives of Native, Indigenous, and First Nations peoples. Support them in our actions and have these words be meaningful. We want to recognize and acknowledge the labor that created the United States and from which we all benefit. We remember that our nation is built on the labor of enslaved people who were forcibly brought to the US from the African continent, and we recognize the continued contribution of their survivors. We acknowledge immigrant labor and recognize that voluntary forced and prison labor contribute to the building and ongoing maintenance of our nation. We acknowledge all unpaid caregiving labor. Additionally, we acknowledge the critical importance of the work towards racial equity that continues across the country in response to racial injustice and generations of structural racism against Black and Indigenous people and other communities of color. I will share my screen. As we work to go from acknowledgement to deed, we know that it is not enough to just give a hollow acknowledgement and have to be sure that we are taking action. We show you here what actions North Seattle College and the North Seattle College Art Gallery are taking to support BIPOC individuals and institutions and to be held accountable. This week is show change in the North Seattle College Art Gallery, and we are working to put up the new show entitled Persist, which is being put together by Claire. This exhibition of political posters opens next Monday, March 11th, with an opening reception on Wednesday, March 13th, 4 to 6 p.m. We hope that you can take the time to come and see it. There will even be an opportunity for gallery goers to print their own posters using a provisional press through the run of the show. Once the show is open, gallery hours are Monday through Thursday, 11 to 5 p.m., and Fridays, 11 to 2 p.m. Our next virtual visiting artist lecture is with Patty Loper in late April, but before that, on March 11th, we will have a dedication for Kalina Chung's Percent for Art project. It's a sculpture on the exterior of the instruction building. There's a lot coming up to celebrate, including an opening celebration of the renovated library. You can also check out our Facebook, Instagram, and our website and flyers around campus to find out what's going on in the gallery and who will be talking and when. We also urge you to visit our website for more information. We will post our links in the chat. You can sign up for emails by contacting us at nscartgallery@seattlecolleges.edu. I believe there's also a link on the website as well. I want to remind you that the NSC Art Gallery is nothing without support from the college, student leadership, and from all of you. Thank you for the help that you have given to the gallery by coming to these events and sharing them with people that you know who might enjoy them. Keep visiting the gallery, stopping in to say hello, and building the art gallery community. Thank you. And on to the reason that we are all gathered here. It is a treat to have artist and my colleague in the NSC art department, Ilana Zweschi, talk to us about her work today. She's a smart and thoughtful teacher. Her work is rich and detailed in the way that she creates it, as well as what it looks like. And she will be discussing the content and context with us today. Excerpting from her bio, she has a bachelor's of science from Skidmore, where she was a art major and a mathematics minor. You may see this in the artwork a little bit. She earned a master's of fine arts in painting from the State University of New York at Albany. Her work is currently represented by Foster White Gallery in Seattle, and she is an instructor at Cornish College of the Arts, as well as teaching painting here at North Seattle College. Zweschi has exhibited expansively and recently completed a large-scale commission for a Meta office in downtown Seattle. She is part of the Microsoft Art Collection and received the Dash Artist Grant for 2022. Notable group shows include Tiger Strikes Asteroid in New York, Museum of Museums in Seattle, and Out of Sight, a survey of contemporary art in the Pacific Northwest. Her work has been published in New American Paintings. She's had a Young State Base interview and is featured in the opening page of the culture section of the Seattle Met in 2020. I will hand you over to Ilana, but before I do, I want to let the audience know that we'll be taking questions in the chat today. Ilana may not be following the chat, but if questions or comments arise during the talk, please write them in the chat and we will hopefully get to all of them. Later on, I will be asking questions from the chat, so I will be looking through it. As usual, we will be sending a transcript of the chat to Ilana after the talk, so if you want to comment on the work and her words, please do, but you might be specific about what you're commenting on, as she will see your words after the talk. But I urge you to support her ideas, and her work in the chat. Welcome, Ilana.
Thank you so much for that great introduction. And thank you so much for everybody who came today to give me your time. And to Amanda and to the North Seattle College Gallery for inviting me to do this talk. Okay, so I'll share my screen. Amanda's right, I cannot seem to manage to keep track of the chat and a shared screen at the same time. So if there is anything that's more like urgent, I guess, Amanda, you could let me know, or we could wait till we get to the question and answer part at the end. I'll start with an image that's from me in my studio. I actually have a show coming up at Foster White Gallery in August, and so I've been slowly building up a large body of work, and they were just all collected in my studio at once, and so that's where this image came from. It's pretty recent. All the little ones, I make bigger ones too. So I wanted to first start by talking about text systems, because this is the kind of core of the ideas behind my work beyond what you can just visually see. I do want to start you back all the way at the very first painting that I made in this series, which was back in 2015. So what I was doing at the time is I was taking, I had spent all of my schooling being a figurative painter, all of undergrad and all of grad. I was like rigidly holding to that type of making, even though I was getting so much question and so much backlash while I was in school. I was really stubborn about that, holding on to it. And then almost as soon as I got out of school, so I graduated in 2014, this painting was made in 2015. So almost immediately I stopped making figurative paintings. So what I did is I took the figurative paintings from my MFA thesis and started cannibalizing them. And then the first solo show I had showing these, I called it Cannibal, because these were all cannibalizations of these previous figurative painting works. And so what I did is I put a grid over this painting. This is a 4 foot by 4 foot painting with a 6 inch by 6 inch grid. And then I was kind of putting these concentric white marks that then sometimes would stop and make a shape that got filled in with a new color, or sometimes would stop and trace the shape from the figurative painting underneath. So the figurative painting is still is dictating almost all of the shapes that you're seeing, but it's been so removed from its context that you no longer recognize it as a figure. But it allows for organic shapes to be present among the geometric ones, which is coming from a pattern, which I'll talk about in a second. So this was the first text body that came from the painting. So all the paintings that I make have these texts that are associated with them that are actually used to make the painting. So I write rules that tell me how to translate the information from the text and translate it through painterly actions. And I like this one, even though it was the first one in my process, has changed a lot. This one has such like a beautiful clarity to it as I'm trying to figure it out. So you can see that you can't actually read any letters, but what I would do is that I would assign certain actions with certain groups of letters. And so then the graphite marks would maybe mean that all those letters were in the same group. But then these two that were circled with yellow meant something different. And then there'd be probably a break into a new word. And then one would be circled with blue or filled in with blue or double circled. And all of those meant something that then turned into the painting. And so I call these algorithm byproducts because they're not the algorithm themselves, but they're what result by executing the algorithm. And really one brushstroke equals one letter from the painting. And this is something that I still do today. So as I completed that brushstroke, I would mark it off on the painting. And so or on the text. So that's where you can see that the text gets all marked up with paint, and that sometimes it's you can track the colors of the paint with the colors of the painting, where a lot of it is white, right? And then occasionally it's bright red. And then you can kind of follow along with that in the painting. And the algorithm would decide how much of the figure underneath got covered up, when it got exposed, and what color it would get filled in with, or if it was left a window of what was painted underneath. And so I want to back up a little bit and talk about where this process came from, where I even got this idea. It actually came from building patterns. So this is a pattern I was putting in the background of my figurative paintings. So this is just a little detail where the rest of it has a figure painting in it. And so you can take a very, very simple element, which in this case is just a triangle. And then the triangle has 4 orientations, right? Like the elements are very, very minimal. And then I only had one rule that each row, it would get shifted to the left by one move, right? So only one shape and one rule could result in a very complex pattern. And so I was doing that out of convenience. And this did come from the fact that I was a math minor and that my brain was used to thinking in systems. And so I was just trying to make pattern making easier. I wasn't trying to make a math painting until I realized that what I was doing was I was making a math painting. And this process actually has a name, which I didn't know at the time, but it's called truchet tiling, which is used in quilt making. And so you can make a really complex quilt pattern just with triangles by applying simple rules to them. So what I call my process now is using the word algorithm. So this is very similar to the word system, but it's not exactly the same. So the key part that makes this an algorithm is that I have an input, which is the text. And then the text goes through a series of if-then statements that puts it into different categories. So that then eventually it tells me what the output is. And the output is a painterly action, like paint a white rectangle. Paint another white rectangle inside of that one, right? So that's an example of painterly actions. Or find a shape from the figure painting underneath. Make it red. Make it spill over to the one next to it, right? So those are all examples of painterly actions. And then the input and output system. So this visual system here shows you a bunch of if-then statements that then would provide an output that is always the same. But for me, the outputs would be there'd be about 4 different options or 5 different options for each zone in the painting. And then there's 4 or 5 different zones. So I'm kind of building complexity, but not because any one particular step is complex, but because I'm adding on to the different scenarios that these processes can be played out. So I'll show you how this process evolved a little bit. This painting, I don't think I have a date on it, but it's like maybe 2016 or 17. So you can see I kept the grid. This is a 4 foot by 5 foot painting. So the grid is still 6 inches by 6 inches. Only this time I set up what I called roadblocks, where there would be parts of the drawing from the figure painting underneath that would be established before the grid was laid on there. And then when the grid did get laid on there, it would be forced to conform around these roadblocks to make these unique shapes, while the roadblocks in the grid were kind of fighting for space. And then in the center, you can see that there's no roadblocks. And so then the grid kind of resumes. So the roadblocks are mostly on the outside. I'm also showing you these because it's one of the last times in this series history where I actually painted a figure underneath first. So when I ran out of grad school paintings to destroy, I started making paintings to destroy, which to me now sounds like such a crazy amount of time. Like I can never do that anymore. But so that's why I can only show you this with old paintings. But I'm really glad I was able to capture this. So this is how this painting started. I'm still doing figure and pattern. So that's where a lot of the geometric shapes come from, is the pattern behind. But then you'll have these little fleshy shapes that, if you know what's underneath, you can start to see a figure in there. And then here's an in-process one where she's getting kind of swallowed up by these grid lines, and then eventually completely removed. So this series, everything is concentric shapes in a grid, and you can actually find fleshy volumetric shapes that come from the painting underneath, which is something that I don't maintain anymore. There's another one. I kind of half painted, half drew. I was starting to get away from the painting underneath. I would only paint, I think, what I knew I was going to expose. But this is another roadblock painting. So now I'm going to show you how I use the text in a much more recent sense. This is 2018, I believe, or 2019. So this is the process that I'm using now, where I'm actually taking a document and printing it out and then priming it so that it becomes a kind of painting in itself, so that I'm not just like destroying this piece of paper with oil paint. And then you can see that I've highlighted certain letters, certain punctuation marks. There's some key words that got outlined. And then as I'm making the painting, it gets filled up with the paint. But then what I added was the secondary version of this document, which is that I took all of the letters. This is another really time-consuming thing I stopped doing. You can see I really like things that are time-consuming, and then I start to fight with myself because I don't have a lot of time. So I manually did this. I'm sure there's an algorithm, a computer algorithm that could do this, but I'm not a computer person. I'm using handwritten algorithms. I took all the letters in the document and sentence by sentence, I alphabetized them. So this sentence had, whatever number, 10 A's and 3 B's. And so I put them in order. And then the end of it would be the spaces or the punctuation marks. And then I would use both parts of the text to make the painting. So you can see that this is all one kind of yellow, and then these yellows vary. And so you'll be able to see that reflected in the painting. Where certain elements in this text on the left would trigger me to move over to the text on the right. And so that's how they were used in combination. But what I loved about this process so much that I actually took like a 20-page document and hand reordered it and presented just that as a work of art. I love that I could take something and make it into nonsense. And so one really important element of this is to understand is that I'm taking texts that I believe are causing harm in the world. So these official documents that have a current large-scale negative impact, but is accepted by society. And so it's laws or it's cultural items of, commercials or performances. So not things that are illegal or frowned upon, but I think are still causing harm. And that when I'm reordering the letters, they're harmless now, right? There's no way this document could hurt anybody because it's total nonsense. So that to me felt like a kind of empowering poetic action I could take when I felt unempowered as being an artist and not having any way to change, to have a strong cultural or legal influence. This is my way of doing that, which actually artists can have a cultural influence. And so that I'm kind of wielding the power that I have, even if it's just for my personal reasons. So this is the painting that was made by it. So you can see that every once in a while there would be, red marks or green marks, and that they would increase in contrast as they move down. And then that would be reflected in this document here, where you can see when a red mark occurred, it was, if you could count, the 5th red mark, it's probably the 5th red mark you see up here. So there is a way for you to see a relationship between the text and the painting, but there's no, I don't think there's any way that anybody could fully unravel it. And so it kind of remains somewhat of a mystery. Even to me, like once the paintings are over and it's been a while, I can't totally remember how I did them. and the way that I'm building imagery, so you can see that I'm still putting figurative paintings underneath, or figurative drawings, which is where the organic shapes come from. And then I'm able to create a focal point, which the earlier paintings didn't necessarily have, by changing the rules. So in this one, the rules were that each row below had to accumulate from the row above it. So anytime it lined up with the row above it, I had to connect it and make the colors the same. And so then things were getting longer and bigger as they moved down. And then here's another one with the ordered text, where you can see that the contrast is going from low to high, and then that's happening from the outside to the inside. So in this one, I'm moving from the outside of the painting to the inside. I also started working with vertical lines instead of the concentric squares. And then I included this one because I've got a great detail shot of it. So you can see there's a lot of texture in these. The paint is very thick. It's like frosting. And so that they're bumpy from end to end. And then I also wanted you to see that when you stand back from a paint, so this is a 5-foot tall painting, it's a pretty big painting. When you stand back from it, it looks pretty perfect in the lines and the marks and everything. But then when you get up close to it, you can see the hand in there. Like I'm not taping these lines. They're drawn perfectly with a ruler, but then they're not maintained. Everything is still got the human hand in it. So there's the kind of push and pull between the creative and the logical and the human and the machine. And then here's the text for this, the original and the ordered text. I'm also using color systems, which is if you've ever taken a class with me, you know how important color is to me. This will maybe make more sense now that you've seen this. So I'm naturally very interested and passionate about color, but it also fits very well into a system. And so there's no reason not to incorporate strong color theory concepts into this process that I'm doing. So here I am in my studio. I know that everything looks kind of perfect and very ordered, but I always start the day with a palette that looks like this, and then by the end of the day, it's all messy. So don't think that it stays like this. You caught me at a perfect moment. But the important thing is to understand that the color has great intention behind it, that I'm not picking it willy-nilly. There's a limited palette, there's a plan, and that I start with this kind of core color and I build it down in terms of value, out in terms of temperature, and then over in terms of saturation. And so I'm using all the different ways of creating variety within one core color so that there's this great balance of harmony and variety, which is really the key to kind of anything. And then I started making these little mini charts that would track a palette for me from the most recent paintings. So these are the 5 most recent paintings in my studio right now. Some of them I don't even have pictures of because they're so new. And each one is a painting. They're not, it isn't one painting. These are all different paintings. And the reason I started grading it like this is that I was working with gradients from top to bottom. And so I wanted to see what the gradient would be, how light or dark it would be, how far it would go on either end, and then the accents that lived inside of that. So this is not a scale that represents all of the colors that'll be in the painting, but instead it represents a good idea of the proportions of the colors in the painting. And that seemed to work pretty well for me and when I was trying to figure out what colors to use. So if there could be any sort of student takeaway from this, it's to respect how complicated color is. And then in order to have it work for you, you have to really give it time and space to consider it before you dive in. If it's entirely intuitive, then in the moment while you're painting, then you'll be too distracted to be able to kind of fully give it a chance to reach its highest potential. And then I'm going to show this just because it's kind of a fun, unique approach. I've only did this once where I took a sheet of music and turned it into a painting. And that was a special commission, so it's not something I normally do, but I really loved it because the relationship between color and sound is so compatible. So you can see at the top row here that you can actually associate different colors with different notes because they're both vibrations of frequencies, and you can match up the frequency of the vibration in order to make this correlation between color and music. So I did that, and then I had to assign a different color zone for the different instruments. So the saxophone was kind of staying in the green zone, the clarinet was in the red zone, and then the piccolo was in the purple zone, and then the trumpet and trombone had a more narrow version of what they could use, and then this was the algorithm byproduct that resulted from it. And then there's a little reminder here of what color the notes are, the musical notes. And this is the painting that resulted. Okay, so now I'll talk about the kind of current stuff that I'm making. Oh, good, I have plenty of time. I always have so much to say, but then I talk really fast. So I make up for it. So I'll talk a little bit about the current work that I'm making and the things that I'm working through. So this is a photo from an artist talk that I did at Linda Hodges Gallery in 2022. I included this so you could see kind of the scale of the paintings that I'm working on. This is the biggest painting that I've made, which is actually hanging in Foster White's window right now. So if you are downtown in Pioneer Square, just walk past Foster White and see it. So this is a 10-foot painting that is broken into 3 different panels. And then you can kind of see how the work fits together in a larger space. Then at the time I was working in these twin paintings where I would make one in one set of colors and then the other in the inverted set of colors, and then they were kind of leaning towards each other. So this is that red painting over here. This is a better image of it. You can see the 3 different panels that it's broken into. Oh, and then I'll share another little special thing about this. So I was working from figurative paintings that I had been making for myself. So I had all these photos of models that I paid to photograph so that I could have, or I was painting myself for my loved ones, you know. So I had this like arrangement of 700 photos that I could pull from when I wanted to get a figurative drawing or figurative painting underneath. And then there was a certain point where I was like, why am I composing these from my own images when I'm just like completely taking them out of context? Why don't I just use images that somebody else has already made? So I started choosing images largely based off of their composition, although sometimes they have a concept to them as well. But for the most part, they're just tools for the composition. So this is the painting that was underneath this one. And I think if you know what's underneath, sometimes you can start to see shapes emerge. And this is a painting where I allowed more shapes to emerge than I usually do, where I'm kind of walking up to that edge of representation, and then I'm kind of backing off right before it hits. So if you have enough context, you can cross that line over into representation, which I'm a little bit unsure about. So that's why I haven't totally crossed the line yet. And I wouldn't show this image to anybody except for people who get the behind the scenes, which is you all. I wouldn't show this like in a gallery next to the painting because I want it to stay in that abstract space. And I'm kind of even hesitating to point out things to you right now. But it did become an important part of my process to include paintings that came from another source, which I'll show one more after this. And then you can also see how valuable this underpainting is in creating these organic shapes. So even like this one here, like I'm not inventing that. I think people assume that I am, or that I can, or that I should, right? But since I had so much experience working with the figure, it seemed a complete mystery to me how people had no image to work with and then invented entirely new things with it. So I feel like I'm still kind of holding on to that familiarity with the figure, or that using the figure as a tool to get access to organic shapes. And then one little moment in the painting that's picked up from the figure painting underneath will ripple out from itself multiple times. And so that's how you get these kind of swirling, rippling marks that have nothing to do with the original figure underneath, because it's just one moment in the figure painting that will allow that to happen. And there's the text from that one. And then here's another painting, another large one, 4 foot by 5 foot. So in this painting, I'm trying a new aesthetic structure where instead of the grid, so even though you can't see the grid totally in a painting like this, you can see the horizontal marks, but you can't see the vertical grid lines. The vertical grid lines are still there, locking in the zones of the painting. So this is how the painting can go from being low activity on the outside to high activity on the inside, is that there's about 4 zones to get from the outside to the middle. And so the outside zones have rules that tell you to basically mostly do vertical lines that don't have a lot of color variation. Every once in a while, there could be a little blip that comes from the figure painting or figure drawing underneath, but it has to immediately straighten back out to being a vertical line and doesn't get to build. And then as we move further in, there's more chances to build. And then by the time we get to the center, there's very few chances for vertical lines. So the different zones in the painting are still present in representing the vertical lines of the grid. So I'm still using a grid. But in a painting like this, I've stopped using the grid to create the zones for me. And instead I used this snaking shape. I call them snakes. I don't have a better word. And they have a little variation to them. They're not completely uniform. And that, I think I've been playing around with that, where they change their variation is still based on a system, where I'm kind of making a drawing of this snake form first that's coming from a grid, and then the grid will tell me where to kind of cut out shapes from it and where to make it consistent. So I'm still kind of playing around with that. And then there's these kind of exploding shapes that snake up from underneath the snake structure, and it wraps around the rest of the canvas, and it builds until it eventually overcomes that snake form. And then the snake form is also having a gradient as it moves up in color. And so the color spaces you can see are just quite different than like this, where the color space is uniform across and it's just the main colors that are changing. Where here, the main colors are changing, going from light to dark, but then the color space behind the background space is also changing, and that it's going from warm to cool and light to dark. And I'll show you the underpainting on this one, because this had a really significant impact. I chose this one for no real reason except for that I liked it. I was not thinking specifically about what shapes I was going to use, but it actually did end up influencing me in a lot of ways that carried over to other paintings from the flowers. And Diego Rivera has a lot of paintings that have these flowers just kind of cascading from the top down and kind of just rippling like waves on the top of the canvas. And so I got to do this with multiple times with multiple Diego Rivera paintings. And you can see that reflected in my painting, right? So this is another one where you can see very clearly how much the underpainting is influencing the actual painting, which sometimes the underpainting gets quite swallowed and I'm kind of doing whatever I want. But in this case, the underpainting is like really asserting its visual power and kind of changing my direction. And then I made more that looked like that. So here's another one. This kind of, it almost looks like a bouquet of flowers or a mushroom cloud. So I titled this one Beauty and Violence because of that, because it looks like a bouquet of flowers or a mushroom cloud. And it's very in line with the concepts in my work too. Here's another one. Okay, so now I'll finally talk about what is just super fresh in my studio, where I think it's going to carry me into what is going to be next for me. So you can see I was building these snaking geometric shapes to allow my concentric shapes to sit inside of or come out of. Now I'm playing around with, on a small scale, making the underneath form even more complex and very designy. And part of me just kind of loves design. It just wants to be a designer. So I think that's me. This is me kind of indulging the designiness of it, but it's doing the same thing where then my concentric lines get to kind of emerge out of these blocks. So this is the underpainting, and then this is the final version of the painting. And then here's another one. So designy. And then it gets pretty covered up by the end, but it's definitely coming from a very different aesthetic direction than where I was coming from. So finally, I'll stop and talk about the concepts behind the text. And this I'm ending on this because it's the least formed of all of my things I have to tell you. So I have been working with texts that I think were harmful for at least 7 years. It's been a long time, but I haven't figured out how to present them publicly other than in connection to the algorithm. And that's because they're very personal to me in that they are things that I am personally horrified by. And I had a hard time finding the connection among them, right? Because I'm the connection. And trying to figure out how to share them without isolating the viewer from my personal perspective. And this is really kind of the trick to conceptual art or concepts in art, is how do you make it specific enough to you that it's coming from an honest place, but also universal enough that your viewer can relate to it from whatever perspective they're coming from. So I feel like what I'm doing with this text here is giving me a chance to get to that point, although it's not fully formed enough that I think that I would put it in any sort of gallery setting. But I'll share it with you now in case you're an artist who's trying to figure out your concepts in your work. So the connection that I've been able to find of all of these texts that I could just easily accumulate just in my own sort of personal view of the world, I did find a connection among them, which is that they uphold a status quo of objectification in our current society. So that more than just being harmful, what's important to understand about them is that they are something that's current. So it's not something that we know was wrong in the past and that now we're like, okay, we're all on board. That was wrong, right? It's something that is currently wrong and currently accepted in society. And it all has to do with objectification, kind of seeing a body as an object, or violable or ownable. And then that's reflected in our culture and in our laws. And that it's a status quo and that we're not even really fully aware of it. And so these are things we can see so easily in the past once they've been changed. We can all, once the society has changed, we can all easily get on board with it. But now I'm trying to deal with these really lofty goals of where's that happening currently that is being accepted unconsciously from the society. So the best example I have of this is two performance pieces from the 60s and 70s, which you've probably heard of, Marina Abramovic's Rhythm O and Yoko Ono's Cut Piece. So in those two performance pieces, they were both set up in a space where the viewers were able to interact with them with whatever objects were provided. So with Yoko Ono's, it was scissors, and then Marina Abramovic, it was a whole slew of things, but it included a knife and a loaded gun, and there's a potential for violence there. But you would think that the people who are going to go see a performance art piece are not interested in being violent. But because they were allowed to do whatever they wanted, it did eventually build to both of these artists being harmed during the course of these performance pieces, being cut and being humiliated and being disrobed. And so what I think that the point of those two performance pieces is that it exposed that at its core, at the time, society viewed a woman's body as violable. And this was something that if you had asked people on the street, are women's bodies violable? They would say no. And so it's kind of this unconscious acceptance from good people that then can be exposed through art practices. So I'm looking to those as a great example of what I'm trying to do now. And so I don't expose the specific origins of the text because I'm not attacking any individual. I'm attacking a larger societal perception, and the texts are simply reflecting that perception back at us. And so if I attack an individual, I think it will be a distraction away from this bigger picture of the status quo. So what I'm trying to do now is expose certain parts of the text. So that's why I'm showing you this. So this was a painting that brought me to here, and then the painting ended. And so I had all this text that was left over. So I hadn't been showing this to anyone because it felt like it had too much information in it. But I realized that there were key words in it that I was using in the painting that I could leave exposed and then redact everything else so that I can open up the context of it. And this is kind of an official legal document that has a bunch of legal words that kind of lull us into this sense of normalcy, that if I remove it from that context, the shocking nature of it can hopefully come through more clearly. So I've exposed enough words that you can maybe start to build a picture of something that you can connect to as the viewer outside of the specific context of this piece. And then I'll show you one more here, which is this. In this painting, I actually used the keywords in the painting. So I already highlighted them and then didn't cover them up because they triggered something different in the painting. And so I wasn't marking them off with the paint because it was just a different process. And so I was already leaving those exposed. And then I realized that I could use that as a way of giving the viewer something to hold on to. And start to build their own narrative around as well. So I only have these two because this is brand new. And I think that the presentation of these will happen only under certain circumstances. These two text pieces right now are currently hanging at Specialist. So you can go to the Specialist gallery for the first Thursday opening. I don't think they're open yet. Maybe they haven't installed until then. But if you wanted to see these in person, you can go to Specialist, and then you can stop by Foster White and see the paintings. And so I do think that they need to have these different contexts, the text pieces and the paintings, because there's so many levels that a person can relate to my paintings on. I think I want to leave room for each person to decide how they relate to it, right? So on one hand, it's just a beautiful object, right? That can hang above your couch and you don't think at all about death when you look at it, or violence. And then I think that's a great way to relate to the work. And I put a lot of effort into making it a beautiful object in terms of the color and the design and the material. You could also relate to it from a combination of math and art standpoint, because I think that there's this misconception that math and art need to be separate, or that one is logical and one is creative, which is not true. Or you can relate to the text aspect of it, of what do you find in the world that is accepted and you think shouldn't be, and then what do you do with it once you found it? What do you do with it? And this is what I'm doing. I'm kind of dismantling it, and it works for me, but I'm working on the public presentation of it to make it more accessible. Okay, that's my spiel, and I guess I didn't talk too long, and I have time for questions.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. It's funny because I'm so glad that you did the last section of this, because I've been aware of your work for a long time, and I always felt like there was something you were hiding from us just a little bit, right? Like it felt a little.
I was hiding it. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Mm-hmm. And so this glimpse in, although kind of vulnerable on your end, I think gives us like so much access to the more access to the work. So it's just beautiful.
For sharing that.
Does anybody want to? There are some questions in the chat which I will bring up, but think about potentially unmuting as well if that's something you would like to do. But the first one, Jaden asked, sort of at the very beginning of all of this, how long did it take to think of each coding or algorithm? And I think that that is a good question, but you sort of talked about it a little bit, like as we filtered through, but it is kind of like how much of that at the beginning, I guess, was this algorithm weighted? How was the weight of the algorithm, I suppose?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's really more of like how do you arrive at something so complex and so fully formed, you know? And I want to make sure that it's that I'm exposing an understanding of it, that it's a long meandering process. Like it's not like just one day you know how to do it, you know, and that it takes a long time to figure out what works for you too, because there are other painters who I really admire who use pure algorithm. I put a lot of my own aesthetic desires into the paintings, and other people would just let it be pure algorithm and they don't care what it looks like. And I admire that, but it's just not who I am. I have to make it beautiful too. And so I think part of this process is also learning what works for you versus what you like in somebody else's paintings or somebody else's work. So each actual, if I go to sit down to write an algorithm, you know, for each painting, it's maybe a half an hour, maybe an hour at the most at the start of each painting, where I'm kind of gathering the text and figuring out how the text is going to be used, and then how the different zones in the painting are going to build, and the design of how the algorithm fits into the design of the painting. But even though that takes an hour, it took 10 years for it to take an hour, right? I think that's an important thing we don't really understand when we encounter people whose work we like. It's like it takes 10 years to get there. And it's taken me 10 years to figure out how to present the text pieces, and I still haven't quite gotten there either. And so I think also like letting things take the time that they take and slowly emerge and discover along the way is the right way to get to the point where you end up with something that really works for you and that is really complex.
Such a good answer to that, right? Like we always forget all of the years of that. Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. This was also maybe midway through, but what was your favorite negative document that you painted over and made harmless through your art? I mean, probably not the newest things, but something from the past that you.
Yeah. So I still feel like I can't tell you like the actual document without being like, this person is bad, because I'm not doing that. But what I will do is actually one time I used a personal data to make a series of paintings. So it wasn't just one painting, but it was one set of data I made 5 paintings with. And it was this little series that was in a particular context in a women's supported, mother supported space, where I was taking text. So the data that I was using was coming from the journal that I had kept when I first brought my babies home from the hospital. I had twins that were born 8 weeks early, and they were premature and very, very, very small. And them gaining weight and eating food was an absolute heavy anxiety obsession of mine. One baby was only 3.5 pounds when she came home from the hospital, and she was only 2.5 pounds when she was born. And so when I look back on this sheet where I was just writing down times and how much she ate, I can see like a mother's like primal fear and anxiety living in this document. Like it's such an important document that I couldn't even paint over it. I had to photocopy it and then paint over the photocopy. And I had a series of paintings that just like burst forth from that so effortlessly, because the anxiety of it was just so right on the tip of my brain because it was personal. And then once I did it, I kind of felt like I was done. Like I didn't want to make any more motherhood paintings. Like I just needed to like get that out of my system. I mean, maybe I will later, but I felt like I needed to kind of process that trauma and kind of take this document that held so much weight and power and turn it into something beautiful. But then I associated it with, so this is my anxiety about my babies not being able to eat enough so that they'll die. And I combined that with a document about dairy cows and how during the pandemic, we had to dump thousands of gallons of milk because of supply chain issues, that it was going to go bad and we had to dump it. And so I took the document that said legally how to dump it so that it wasn't an environmental disaster, and I combined those with my experience. So I was opening it up to this bigger narrative that is related to objectification and is related to a status quo that we don't see of, in order for cows to give us milk, they have to be mothers. And I think we know that, but we don't really know that. I think we think that they just produce milk all the time, and that we know that humans have to be pregnant to have, or in order to give birth to have milk. And then what happens to their babies? Their babies get taken away. And so they have this motherhood instinct to feed their babies, and they can't. And their babies oftentimes incur really horrible fates. So that was the one time that I used personal documents, and the one time that I exposed the specific document, so that you could see all the kind of swirling concepts of kind of personal anxiety, generalized to motherhood anxiety, generalized to pandemic anxiety, which we've all experienced, and then generalized to a status quo of objectification that most of us are accepting, of taking the milk from other cows.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Kelly asked, were there any artists that inspired your art?
Oh God, lots of artists. Well, Yoko Ono and Marina Abramovic really had a big impact in terms of the concept. But then early on, there were artists that were working with systems that had a huge impact on my ability to even comprehend that this was a thing that was possible, to take logic and turn it into a painting. And James Sienna was really the first one. So he's making pure algorithm paintings. You can see the algorithm in the painting. It's a one-step algorithm. And then I met him on accident in New York, just randomly. We were eating at the same table because we knew the same people, Deborah Slotsky and, oh my God, I'm blanking on his last name, Jason something. I can tell you when I think of it. But yeah, there's influences from all sides. Oh, and then Afko, the writings of Afko and Eva Marie Lindhall, who are both philosophers, helped me build the philosophy of this as well. So there's performance and philosophy, and then concept and visuals as well. I see Paula has her hand up. Should I break your order, Amanda, and let Paula go?
Absolutely.
Hi, Ilana. That was awesome, as always, to hear you talk about your work and to get even more context. One of the questions that I had, and maybe you kind of already answered it, which was like, when I think about algorithms, I think about rules. And there's definitely a part of me that feels really comfortable with rules and structure as a way to sort of take away some decision-making processes, because sometimes life is so overwhelming that if I can just have a structure, then I can move forward. So it was nice. You did say a little bit like you give flexibility within your algorithms, but I don't, and like the output, but I don't know like if that is when you create the algorithm or if it's in the process of making it. So I guess I'm wondering is like, have you ever like, I'm going to say like painted yourself in a corner with your set of rules where you're sort of like a rule creates a mark or a structure or a color pattern or a relationship that you're just like, that doesn't resonate with you. And what do you do with that? How do you unwind that? Like, do you ever give yourself permission to change, or do you just keep moving forward?
Yeah, that's a really good question, which I actually meant to talk about and I forgot, so I'm glad you brought it up. So I see this as a collaboration with an algorithm. It's not pure algorithm. I see it about 50-50 collaboration. So what I do is I start from this perfection. I see it as perfection, just like pure algorithm, where I write the algorithm and I have to execute it. I can't question it, and I'm just going along. And every once in a while, I'll realize my rules are not working, and I will change them. Okay, so there's a little bit of wrestling with myself where I'm like, I have to just follow the rules. That's how it's interesting, versus like, it's just not working. I'm going to change it. So mid painting, I sometimes do follow the rules or change the rules, which is part of the reason why I sometimes can't go back and remember what I did. And that's more Steve Roden. So that's where James Sienna was all pure. Steve Roden was all like, I don't even know what I did. It was so jumbled up. And you can see that reflected in the imagery of their paintings as well. But mostly what I'm doing, if I'm not changing the rules, which doesn't happen very often, is I'll let the painting start to finish absolutely fill up the whole surface with the algorithm. And then once I have that, I'll go back in and just totally aesthetically tweak things. And this is the part that I almost like am ashamed of, because I wish I could just like let it be what it is. But I just like, I have to make it beautiful. And so that's when I kind of apply my art school principles of design hardcore onto that. But the beauty of that is that if I only did that, I think they'd be boring. And so I still need the algorithm first in order to build up the tension and the unpredictability. But then even if I go back in and wrestle it into something comfortable, it still won't be so comfortable that it's boring. And some paintings, I do that so much with that it's completely unrecognizable from its original algorithm state. And other paintings, the big red one with the lions and the underpainting, that one had almost no tweaks to it whatsoever. And so sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. And it's just, so I think in the end, it's about 50-50 me and 50-50 the algorithm.
And that design, all the design stuff is another set of rules. So
it is, right.
So it's not problematic.
I'm not creative. Yeah.
I don't mean
no, it's true. And it's totally embedded in us.
Absolutely. And if you go to different cultures, it's different.
Yeah. Right.
I think it's lovely. Sorry. I'm gonna ask a question, but it's maybe not a question. Sorry, I'm one of those people. But I think it's wonderful that you brought up Yoko Ono's and Marie Abramovich's pieces. But I had heard about Yoko Ono's piece, and with Yoko Ono's work, it's kind of like you can hear about it and think you know what it is until like if you watch that video, it is so upsetting to watch her reactions to people cutting away her clothes. Like I saw it probably like 4 years ago for the first time, and it is such an amazing resource. So thank you for bringing that up. And just like if my face when you brought it up went, oh, it was because I totally
remember it. Yeah. Right. And I'm sure she would, yes, like clearly she wasn't expecting the audience to be so extreme because she believed more in the audience than they deserved. And that's really like reflecting society as a whole. Yeah. Which is the brilliance of it.
Absolutely. I thank you so much for your time. I'm going to stop the recording, but I thank you for your time, for sitting down with us and explaining and really just showing us even the vulnerable parts of your work. Thank you, Ilana.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and thanks to everybody who came. All right, have a good rest of your day.